Governor O'Malley, I want to thank you for your wonderful comments, your kind comments. But in addition to what you say about me, I want to thank you for what you do every day to stand up for social justice, equality, economic empowerment, and to put your values in the budget. When there's the first to make the cuts, some throw women and children under the bus. Not this man. He wants them on that bus riding into the future. And of course, my very, very good friend, Senator Ben Cardin, who is, we're with each other every day on the Senate floor. There's not a day that goes by that we don't speak about the people of Maryland, the issues facing the country, and how we can support our president in getting America rolling again. Senator Cardin's own reputation for fighting for social justice and equality, I think, is well known and well documented, and we owe a debt of gratitude. To my colleagues in government, to see so many friends from the Maryland General Assembly, and we're joined also by other federal people who are here. To my surprise, the superintendent and commandant of the Naval Academy. I'm coming around State Circle in my car, and I said, oh my gosh, there's the superintendent and the commandant of the academy. And I'm yelling out the window in my dainty dulcet tone. I said, hey, how are you? I said, what's the big deal? And they said, you. So we welcome you, and also we want to welcome the people here from the Park Service. I want to acknowledge all of those in the African American community who in their own time and often on their own dime have fought for the recognition not only of Miss Tubman and the work of the Underground Railroad, but for the African American community. Who feels your work in African American tourism is much needed and much appreciated. Dr. Jackson from the National Association of the Colored Women's Club. We want to thank you for your scholarship and your steadfastness in telling the story. Don Pinder, Dr. Evelyn Rising, the Tubman family themselves. Gosh, this is just fantastic. And we know Skip Saunders is here from the Reginald Lewis Museum. It really means a lot to have all of you here. And it means a lot for me to be able to get this award. I'm deeply touched and I'm deeply honored. When I, as a schoolgirl, was learning the story of the Underground Railroad and the story of those who participated in it, I did not fully grasp what its meaning was. This is why the story needs to be told. And it needs to be told again and again and again. You heard the words of Senator Cardin describe the life of Ms. Tubman. You heard the governor talk about it. I'm going to say, but you can never say it enough, and you can never say it again, because it is a story for the fight for freedom for not only African Americans, but to liberate the soul of the United States of America. As a schoolgirl, when I heard that there was something called the Underground Railroad, I thought it was a railroad, and I thought it was underground. As this little girl growing up during World War II, when I heard that's how it helped get the slaves to freedom, I thought it was like a subway that started down south, that people got on at various stops and went all the way into Philadelphia and Pennsylvania. How naive and how wrong. There was nothing easy. There was no fast track to freedom, and we know it. That's why we got to tell it again. There was not a picture of the Underground Railroad. We didn't know that it was a network of smart people who, though forbidden to learn to read, invented the codes to be able to sing, to gospel music, and tell their story. The coalition of abolitionists and those Quakers who ran safe houses, and the code of the quilt of the Quaker women, as, again, for the stops and steps along the railroad. I think that's a story, and we've got to tell that story again and again about how smart everybody was who participated in it, how brave everybody was in it, and that black and white saw themselves in it together, each one helping each other along the way, and each one was helping liberate the other along the way. It is an incredible story that needs to be told. And when I think about Harriet Tubman, I love reading about her. I love reading about the fact that she was short. I just thought it was great. They used the term petite. She wouldn't say, I'm not petite, because petite implies dainty. If you're going to use the D word about Ms. Tubman, you're going to use the word defiant. She was defiant, and she defied that slave master. And she defied all of the odds to do that. As we now know, she married, and fearing that she would be sold, she went away and set out in the dark. There were no roads. There were no GPSs. There was no AAA to call for a slave on the run, and for a woman to be on the run. Now, over the backwaters and the tidewaters, knowing what Eastern Shore was, she followed that North Star. The North Star was in the sky, but the North Star was in her heart. Relying on ingenuity and fortitude, she made her way to Philadelphia and meant her own route in safety. But Harriet had something else, because for Harriet it was not about you, it was about we. Though she made it to freedom, she wanted others to make it freedom. What I found so amazing about her story is that she not only made her way, but that she came back for others to find their way to freedom. She did that several times, leading more than 300 slaves to safety, using clever techniques, outwitting the master, even using his own horse and buggy. And when you heard the great gospel song, "Swing Low, Sweet Chariot, the chariot's coming to take me home," you knew the conductor was coming. You knew the conductor was Harriet Tubman. And though she herself had borne the lash, felt the sting of the whip, and even had an anvil thrown at her head that left a permanent injury, she continued to do that. And then came the great Civil War, the war between the states. She signed up and helped the Union Army because she knew the terrain and the territory. She acted as a spy. She acted as a guide. She was on the helping hand. But when the war was over, there was no medal for Harriet Tubman. There was no federal pension for Harriet Tubman. She went up to New York, where, as part of our program and our legislation, New York will honor her. But there she ran an old age home for elderly Negroes. And she herself was a caregiver and earned the money to take care of herself. But then when Harriet could no longer take care of others, who was going to take care of Harriet? It was the African American women who banded together in small communities with small money, kind of like little tip jar kinds of things, that took care of Harriet in her old age. Well, now I think it's time to tell the story for the ages. And this is why Senator Cardin and I worked so hard to establish federal legislation to make here in Maryland, and recognizing the role that New York plays, the national Park Service recognition for the Underground Railroad and the Harriet Tubman Memorial. We've got it through the committee. Now we've got to get it through the Senate floor. We're going to try to get it through the House of Representatives, because the story must be told, and it must be told again and again and again. I'm going to continue to fight for that legislation, and I'm going to continue to work for the federal funds for the Visiting Center. Senator Cardin and I, working side by side, he on the Budget Committee and I on the Appropriations, have been able to get 2 special sets of funding totaling close to $1 million for the federal checkbook towards the Visiting Center. But it will cost more than that. And our governor has stepped up and has pledged additional funds to be able to do that. So we want to tell the story of the past, But if Miss Tubman were with us today, she'd say, you know, don't be talking about the past, Barbara. What are you doing now? What are you doing for the people now? What's going on? And she would have looked up and she said, look at who's president of the United States. Hey. She would have been thrilled and excited to cast her vote for him. She would have been thrilled and excited to see the legislation be passed, and her Maryland heart would have been so thrilled that day in January, right after he took office, that her friend and her fellow Marylanders had worked to pass something called the Lilly Ledbetter legislation. The Lilly Ledbetter legislation was about a woman who was denied equal pay for equal work, went to the Supreme Court, bad decision there about that. We had the legislation to guarantee it. Senator Barb Mikulski, her neighbor on the Western Shore, over there from Eastern Shore, moved the legislation through the Senate with the great men in the Senate like Ben Cardin, who moved it through the House. And she would have seen that picture, and maybe we would have been able to even get her to come to the White House right there. And she would have seen the first African-American president of the United States sign as his very first piece of legislation the equal pay for equal work legislation for women. And as he signed that name on there, he turned to me and gave me that pen. I have the pen from the very first African-American president signing his very first piece of legislation, and it was about economic empowerment. It was about Well, now he was coming, she would have said, well, that was 18 months ago. And we would say that in the Constitution, now that we have the equal protection under the law, now that women have the right to vote, now that we advance our freedom, there's an implicit freedom in our Constitution. And the implicit freedom is we love our Constitution, we love our Bill of Rights. And then implicit in it is something called the freedom to choose. You have the freedom to speak, the freedom of religion, the freedom to organize. But there's also the freedom to achieve. And she would say time not only for an underground railroad, but a superhighway. A superhighway of economic empowerment, educational opportunity. She would have said, I looked at that federal budget you're talking about all the time. $6 billion to spend federal prisons. Say, can't you change some of that and start putting money into school construction? Can't you change some of that money and start putting it in the Can't you then put you said you thought the railroad was a fast track to freedom. Let's put our young people on the fast track to the freedom to achieve. I accept this honor not only for what I've done, but what I pledge to do in the future. God bless you.